Colonel Avery Renard stood firmly in the drop bay of the ENS Razorclaw, his gaze locked on the 100 Marines before him, their armor reflecting the harsh light above. The hum of the ship's engines and the distant chatter of the crew filled the air, but for Renard and his Marines, there was only the mission. Everything else was mere background noise. Listen up. Renard's voice cut through the anticipation, each word deliberate, embodying the gravity of what was to come. The spacers are going in deep on the enemy position at high speed. They are going to be hanging their aces out to dry until they get out the other end of the interdiction bubble. Then they are going to skip right back where they came from and do it again. They are going to take a beating to distract from our low-orbit insertion, and we are not going to let that go to waste. Are we clear? Without missing a beat, the Marines' response thundered through the bay, a unified shout that vibrated off the metal walls. Sir, yes, sir. Renard's gaze swept over the faces before him, each Marine ready, the fire in their eyes burning with anticipation. We are the line, he declared, the weight of their duty resonating in his voice. The Marines' chant returned in instant chorus, fierce and resolute, their voices merging into a single powerful entity as they raised their fists. The sword and the shield. Renard took a second to revel in the satisfaction of a company well-disciplined before softly replying, "Strap in, boys." Each Marine sat strapped in as the Razorclaw engaged its Alcubierre drive and appeared 100 kilometers above ground. A timer appeared in each Marine's visor, counting down the seconds before launch as their suits were quickly filled with drop medium. Renard heard some exclamation from the weird alien observer through his comms linked to the bridge as he bit down on the breathing tube, shutting out the world as the timer ticked down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The suit went completely rigid and tightened around him as the launch pod shot out of the launch tube, then immediately fired thrusters to align with the drop vector. Renard bit down hard as the pod started evasive maneuvers, jerking from side to side as it shot down towards the planet. A new counter appeared in his visor, counting down from 3. As it reached 0, the drop pod split into a launch vehicle that continued down towards the drop site and a passenger pod that spun around and fired full braking thrusters. The visor HUD showed Renard the tactical situation. 3 Marine pods Kia. Heavy support vehicle pod has taken glancing hits, combat bots at full capacity. 10 seconds before the Razorclaw's planned railgun barrage. 5 seconds. 3, 1. Railgun predictions vectors appeared on his visor at the exact timing he expected, and the Razorclaw disappeared in a jump flash. Grinning while biting down hard to keep the air tube in his mouth, Renard silently grunted to himself, Semper Fidelis. The heavy support vehicle pod initiated its deployment sequence, transforming into a flying gunship and instantly opening fire on any known troop position and AA entrenchment, jinking around to avoid return fire as several dozen launch vehicles impacted across the area of operations, causing large explosions as their previously inert explosive payloads were armed and activated. Renard continued down towards his designated drop zone, watching as the railgun pellets raced past him to impact high-risk targets seconds before his pod finally hit dirt with an impact that shook the ground. Feeling his suit instantly release its iron grip on him, he staggered forward as the pod disassembled around him and the drop medium drained from his suit. Quickly looking around him, he saw nothing but a destroyed outpost with craters going down dozens of meters, a ruined bunker at the bottom. As he made his way down, the comm system finished its handshake with the Allied aliens already deployed to the planet, and he instantly received an incoming comm stream from a borderline panicked operational officer. "Human officer, come in. Human officer, come in. This is Colonel Renard of the Human Marine Corps. Who am I speaking to? This is Frontline Command. Humans, you're on the wrong side of the front lines. Do everything you can to exfiltrate immediately, and we will try our best to provide covering fire." As Renard reached the bottom of the crater, he saw a Cygnus alien stirring under the rubble of the bunker he had been cowering in. Renard grabbed the rifle that had been slung around his shoulders as the drop pod disassembled and aimed it at the alien, his foot planted squarely on top of the large piece of rubble that he was trapped under. "Negative Frontline Command. We are the line. You come to us." In the dimly lit command deck of the Dropforge-class ENS Razorclaw, a hum of anticipation vibrated through the air, palpable among the crew. Vri, the newly assigned Alliance liaison officer, was moving from station to station, observing the crew in action. Not quite imposing in stature, Vria's presence was nonetheless commanding, his sleek, silver-furred form moving with a purposeful grace that belied the tension of his surroundings. As he moved to each station, he made mental notes on how nervous the crew seemed. The ship was in an active war zone, but it was stealthed several light seconds from the contested planet, Meloria Prime, and the Orion forces had several safe drop zones near the front lines for the troops of the human assault transport, should the human command section request emergency reinforcements. Hopefully this was merely a reaction caused by the inexperience of the crew, and not an indication of the grit of the humans. The Cygnus War had just started, and the Alliance needed every species member to pull its weight, including the Ocean Worlders. As Vri approached the holographic map flickering in the center of the command deck, Captain Myrov, commander of the ENS Razorclaw, acknowledged his presence with a nod. "Officer Vri, let's go over the strategic situation one more time while we await orders," he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of their mission. The central hologram displayed Meloria Prime, highlighting contested zones, Alliance forces positions, and anticipated enemy fortifications. The planet was in deadlock, one huge trench across from north to south as both sides rotated their forces around the planet with the passing of each day. It seemed inevitable that this invaluable strategic position was going to become the worst meat grinder in the history of all known species. As they were going through the list of hotspots, the comms officer received a message. Captain Myrov walked over to hear the message, and Vri stepped back to stay out of the way and observe. As Myrov listened to his new orders, a predatory grin spread across his face. As he turned around, the hologram switched to a view of the crew compartment and its 100 Marines. Captain Myrov raised his voice and started shouting orders at his crew. "Listen up, boys. The sneaks just called, and they have a special opportunity for us." A groan spread across the Marine detachment, with several getting out of their cots and putting on their uniforms. "We have received orders for a full mobilization. Hell drops across the board, 100K insertion. You have 5 minutes to get suited up and strapped in before we go full combat speed and jump to the drop site along with the rest of the division, and I am taking this ship to full burn whether you are suited up or not. Go, go, go." The ship burst into action, as Vri strapped himself into his chair to stay out of the way. He was pleasantly surprised with the eagerness of the humans, and hopefully they would keep the energy up once they joined up with the frontline troops from the forward LZ. Vri was looking forward to seeing the drop tactics of the humans, who for whatever reason had focused their assault transporters around small ships with a contingency of 100 soldiers, as well as a few armored vehicles and a few heavy bots, rather than the full 5,000 troop deployment ships that was common among the Orion Alliance militaries. 5 minutes later to the second, the Razorclaw, its 200 sister ships, and the rest of the human navy initiated full thrust simultaneously, each maximizing its own velocity along its assigned vector. Once every ship had reached combat velocity, all ships activated Alcubierre at once, jumping a few light seconds and emerging over the planet. Vri had but a second to look over his instruments before he gaped at the screen, staring in disbelief. The human warships were in high orbit, outside of the enemy interdiction zones providing support and drawing fire as expected, but the Razorback had jumped in uncomfortably low over the atmosphere, at a height where there was a very real risk that the ship would have appeared inside the atmosphere where the sonic shock of suddenly being in an atmosphere would have destroyed the ship. He barely looked at the troop deployment projection and the current ship position before a feeling of dread overpowered him. "Humans, we're on the wrong side of the front lines. We have to abort," he shouted in a panic. Captain Myrov turned to look at the alien on his bridge, interrupting in a perilous situation, a burning look of fury in his eyes. "See, sir, we entered orbit 100 kilometers above the planet at high speed heading towards the front lines. We are going to overshoot the secured LZ and enter enemy-controlled space. We only have a few minutes before enemy warships open fire on us. On our world, we call that a deadline." The officer next to Vri snickered to Vri, who just looked back at him in horror. Captain Myrov turned his head in anger and disbelief at the outbreak from the alien observer. "Liaison Officer Vri, we didn't miss the front line. We are the line." He sneered at the alien, who withered in his seat. Captain Myrov composed himself, hit his comms button, and spoke to his crew. "We are in position. Get ready to drop." When all is darkness, we bring the light. The Marines shouted back in unison, as the ship shook with repeated launches and the Marines' drop pods shot away from the ship and a timer appeared on the main holoscreen. Semper Fidelis, Myrov whispered to himself. Vree put his head down, an instinctual reaction of his species after being admonished, and nervously studied the tactical situation. A Messin cannon hit the shields, and the ship shuddered. Glancing hit, shields at 90%. Hold. The timer reached 40 seconds as the ship shook again. 78% hold. At 17 seconds, the ship shook violently and the lights flickered. Hold. The timer hit 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire railguns and jump. Get us out of here. At the Cygnus Army Forward HQ, Sergeant Grath was having a fine day. The glimmers in the sky was a clear sign that the enemy was bringing in fresh meat, so he and his heavy assault unit would have their chance for glory yet again. He was taking in the soothing earthly smells of the alien planet and the warm sunlight when an air siren sounded. Confused, but conditioned by years of drilling, he immediately ran for the nearest emergency bunker access point. He was barely at the bottom of the shaft when the ground shook beneath him and knocked him off his feet. Must have been a big one, he thought to himself. The emergency lights bathed the emergency bunker in an ominous light. Sergeant Grath and the rest of the people that had made it to the bunker looked around to get an assessment of how many soldiers they had left, and the senior surviving officer had just started barking orders when the world exploded around them. When Sergeant Grath came to, an alien in power armor was standing over the rubble he was buried under, rifle pointed at his head. Sergeant Grath was no longer having a fine day.